Okay, so the first part one of solving quadratic equation is going to involve factoring. And so remember, let's discuss what a quadratic equation is. So a quadratic equation, you're going to need the notes from Canvas. So a quadratic equation is an equation that can be written in this form: ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now remember, in a previous course, you were told that a quadratic equation written in this form is also called standard form. So this is also called standard form. All right, so general form or standard form. It's also called a quadratic equation in X is also called a second degree polynomial equation. All right, now one of the other things you recall when solving a quadratic equation by factoring is a zero factor property. In this course, it's called the zero product principle or the zero factor property. So you may remember it stated as this as well. So basically it says if you have one or more factors whose product is zero, then one of those has to be zero. So as we solve this quadratic equation by factoring, you're going to notice at some point you're going to set each of those factors equal to zero. Okay, so remember the steps. The first step is to make sure it's in standard form or general form. Then once it's in standard form or general form, you're going to factor completely. And then you're going to use the zero factor property or the zero product principle. So you're going to set each of those factors equal to zero, and then you're going to solve each of those equations. Okay? All right. So let's look at this example. So number one. Suppose you wanted to solve 6x squared plus 11x minus 10 equals 0. All right, so notice this quadratic equation is already in standard form or general form. So it's already in that form. Okay, so once it's in that form, then we're going to factor. So notice the GCF here is 1. So we're going to factor this as two binomials. And then remember trial and error. Basically, you just did the reverse FOIL, trial and error. If something doesn't work, you try something else. So remember, FOIL, FOIL, so what times what is going to be 6x squared. So there are several possibilities. Remember, there are 6x times 1x, 3x times 2x. I'm going to try 3x and 2x first. And then remember, then we went to the last. So the last sign's negative, so that means these signs in here have to be different, because a negative times a positive is going to be a negative. So they have to be different. And the larger of the outer and the inner will take that middle sign. So if you need to go back and review factoring from the course from last semester, you may need to do that. Okay, so the possibilities for 10, let's go to the last now. So we know that for negative 10, we can choose 10 and 1, 2 and 5. But remember, one has to be positive, one has to be negative. So if we choose, let's say 5 and 2, you know 2 cannot go here. So always think about this. 2 cannot go here, because if I put 2 here, let's say, that means I can factor out a 2 from here, which meant that the original polynomial is divisible by 2, or that I could factor out a 2, and I can't. So 2 cannot go here. So the 2, let's try to put the 2 here, and then the 5 will go here. All right, now remember the last sign's negative, so one of these is positive, one of these is negative. So let's think about which one's positive, which one's negative. The outer is going to be 15x. The inner is going to be 4x. Now remember, one's positive, one's negative, so when I subtract those, 15x minus 4x, I get 11x, and that's what I wanted. But remember, I want the larger of these coefficients to be this middle term. So I need 15x to be positive. So that means the 5 has to be positive and the 2 has to be negative. And before you go on to the next step, always check your work. 3x times 2x is 6x squared. A negative 2 times a positive 5 is a negative 10. Now let's make sure we get that middle term. The outer is 15x. The inner is a negative 4x. And when I add them up, I get 11x, and that's what I wanted. Okay, now the next step, once you factor, the next step is to use a zero factor property. So we're going to say each of those factors is equal to 0. And remember, that's also called the zero product principle. So my two factors are 3x minus 2, and we say that equals 0. 2x plus 5, say that equals 0. So remember, the zero factor property says if you have two or more factors whose product is 0, then one of those has to be 0. So either this one is 0 or this one has to be 0. But one of them has to be 0. There's the only way you can get a 0. So notice I went from a quadratic equation to two linear equations. So let's solve each of these linear equations. So I get 3x minus 2 equals 0. So I add 2 to both sides. I get 3x equals 2. Just divide both sides by 3. Simplify. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 1 times x is x. So one of my solutions is 2/3. Over here, subtract 5 from both sides. Combine like terms. Positive 5, negative 5 is 0. 2x and 0 is 2x. Equal. 0, negative 5 is negative 5. To get x by itself, right now I'm multiplying by 2. The opposite of multiplying by 2 is divide by 2. Reduce. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 times x is x. So the other solution is negative 5/2. So assuming that I factored correctly, these are my two solutions. So on my math lab, they may ask you to separate the solutions using commas. So you'll say x equal, it'll have x equal with a blank. And you're going to put 2/3, comma, and then negative 5/2. All right. Number 2. Suppose we had 3x squared minus 2x equal 8. So 3x squared minus 2x equal 8. First of all, notice that it is not in general form or standard form. So I got to put it in standard form. So I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides. Subtract 8 from both sides. What you do to one side, you do to the other. So I get 3x squared minus 2x minus 8 equal 0. And then once it's in standard form, we're going to factor. The GCF here is 1, so I'm going to go directly to two binomials. And then let's see what we get there. So let's see. The only possibility for 3x squared is 3x and x, so that one's easy. 3x times x is 3x squared. Now again, notice we got another. The last term is negative, so one's positive, one's negative. But this time I need an 8. So the possibilities for 8 would be 8 and 1, 4 and 2. Let's try 4 and 2. If I put the 4 here and the 2 there, let's see what happens. So remember, I want a negative 8, so one has to be negative, one has to be positive. First of all, before I even put that in there, let's look at the outer and the inner. Always go to the outer and the inner and make sure you get that middle term. So the outer is 12x, the inner is 2x. And notice there is no way you can get a 2x, because remember, one's positive, one's negative, so you're going to have to subtract. 12x minus 2x is 10x. There's just no way. That's always going to be a 10x. Or a negative 10x. So there's no way you'll get a 2x. So the 2 and the 4 won't work. So then, remember, trial and error. So then what you're going to do is, let's say I put the 4 here and the 2 there. And don't forget, that's equal to 0. You must say equal 0. So notice, when you do the worksheets, it's got to always look like this. So make sure you follow those steps. Okay, so let's, remember the last sign's negative, so these have to be different. Let's check the outer now. The outer is 6x. The inner is 4x. And remember, these are different signs, so you're going to be subtracting. When I subtract those, 4x from 6x, I do get 2x, and that's what I wanted. But I wanted a negative 2x. So that means that in order for this to be a negative 2x, the 6x has to be negative, and the 4x has to be positive. So that means that this right here has to be x minus 2, and this right here has to be 3x plus 4. All right, and before we go on, always check your work. 3x times x is 3x squared. A positive 4 times a negative 2 is a negative 8. The outer, 3x times a negative 2 is a negative 6x. The inner, 4 times x is 4x, and when I add them up, I do get negative 2x. All right, and then finally, we got to use the zero factor property, or the zero product principle. So I said each of those factors equal to 0. So I get 3x plus 4 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0, and then I solve for x. So I get 3x equal negative 4, so x is a negative 4. So x is negative 4/3. So there's one of your solutions. Over here, this one's easy. Just add 2 to both sides, combine like terms. I get x to be 2. So those are your two solutions. You would say x equal, if it looked like this on my math lab on a worksheet, x equal blank. You would say negative 4/3, comma 2. All right, one more. Let's look at this one. So this is number 3. Okay, number 3. Suppose you had, all right, 16, let's do 2x times x minus 3 equals 5x squared minus 7x. Okay, so first of all, what we need to do here, if you recall from a previous course, is that I need to get rid of these parentheses right here. Now I have a monomial times a binomial, so I'm going to use the distributive property first. So 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times a negative 3 is a negative 6x equal 5x squared minus 7x. All right, now remember the next step would be to combine like terms, but if you look on this side, these two are not alike, and these two are not alike. All right, so the next step is to put it in standard form or general form. So we need to bring all the terms to one side. Now notice that it's probably easier to bring the 2x squared to the other side because 5 is bigger than 2. The coefficient of this x squared is bigger than the coefficient of this x squared, and you tend to want the leading term to be positive. So I'm going to subtract 2x squared. Combine like terms, 2x squared minus 2x squared, 0. 0 minus 6x is a negative 6x. Be careful, don't say 6x, it's a negative 6x. Equal, and then that's going to be 3x squared minus 7x. All right, and adding 6x to both sides, because a negative 6x and a positive 6x is 0. So remember, you're adding 6x to both sides. Combine like terms, I get 0 equal 3x squared. A negative 7x and a positive 6x is a negative x. All right, now I can transpose these sides. So I'm going to rewrite it so that 0 is on the right. So I get 3x squared minus x equal 0. Now to factor this, notice the GCF here is x. I can factor out an x, and I get x times 3x minus 1. Always check yourself. X times 3x is 3x squared. X times a negative 1 is a negative x equals 0. And then I'm using the zero factor property. So I'm going to set each of these factors equal to 0. So I get x equals 0. 3x minus 1 equals 0. So notice I went from a quadratic equation to two linear equations, and I just got to solve for x. This one's easy because x is already by itself, so one of your solutions is 0. To get x over here, I'm going to add 1 to both sides, combine like terms. I get 3x equal 1. Divide both sides by 3. I get x to be 1/3. So I get x to be 0, comma 1/3. So there's your solutions. Okay, so that's the factoring. Again, you did much more with this last semester, but that's a quick review on Part 1 factoring.